Hey everyone, and welcome to another Adobe Live Creative Challenge. We're talking motion today inside of After Effects. What exactly are we talking? We're going to be talking about the 3D camera tracker as well as the typical motion tracker inside of After Effects and what you can do with one and what you can do with another. But first, thank you so much for joining in. Hello to everyone in the chat. Love to have you here. I would love for you also to follow along as we go through this, and you can get your starter files there in the description. There's a link to download. What is that going to look like? It's going to look like this. So you will open it up and you're going to have your assets, which is just the footage we're going to be working with today, and then your After Effects project. So open it up, follow along, and let's have some fun. Let's talk about it. All right, so here is our project. And basically, what do you think? This is going to be the 3D camera tracker, that text that's kind of in 3D space, big surprise. And then we have our motion tracker, which is great for stuff that is moving throughout a scene and you're tracking a particular object in a scene. This is great for product call outs. You know, maybe a lot of sports companies do this and they have like a shoe or something that they want to highlight, you know, how cool the rubber insole is on this, or maybe it's for a person's name. And your results might vary with every shot. Tracking is one of those things that's very dependent on the particular shot you're working on, but let's go ahead and play around with examples of where you might use each one. And we're gonna go ahead and start with the motion tracker. So, and then we'll also talk about maybe how to animate some of this stuff and make the lighting a little bit more unique if there's time. So, here's our footage, which you can download again in that starter file. The starter link is in the description. And we're gonna take our dirt bike clip and we're gonna make a new composition. And it's gonna size it perfectly to our footage and the frame rate and everything if we do that nice little drag technique. Here's our clip. Let's go ahead and start with the motion tracker. So we're gonna grab our tracker. I'm gonna bring it up here so you guys can see it. And this is the tracker window. If you don't have this, under window, go down to tracker. Make sure that's checked on so you can see your window. That might be hard to track without it. But you have track camera, which is going to be 3D tracker. We'll talk about that in the second part. And then we have track motion, which is going to be what we're going to use to track a little identifier call out to my friend Julian, who's riding the dirt bike while I'm flying the FPV drone. So let's hit track motion, and what that's going to do is open up this dirt bike footage into the layer comp. And if we zoom out, we can see it's just that. We're no longer in the composition, we're in the actual layer. And we have our track point here. We'll go to the first frame. And the way this works is that little crosshair is going to be the point it's actually trying to track. And then you got these big old boxes you can draw out. And this is where you're gonna have to play with what works best for your scene. And we can set this here. Trackers work best with contrast. So if you find something that's black versus white, that's excellent. That's great contrast, so it can tell the difference between those pixels. If you're trying to track, you know, this here where it's a dark brown on top of a light brown, it's gonna have a hard time. So let's just, for example, kind of, hey, maybe we track here, and this outer box is basically telling the software, hey, this is the search area, like don't worry about anything out here, you're not gonna find anything, we don't need to spend time searching the entire shot. And then this is basically what it's looking for, and this is the point it's trying to attach to. So you can size all these. The bigger you make it, the longer it's gonna take, the harder it's gonna try to match things. And that can be good, and sometimes it can maybe not be so good. So let's just see, for example, here, we're tracking to the top of his sweatshirt. Maybe that's a good spot. Maybe another good spot could be the back of his helmet. We have kind of the blue, the white, the black. It can maybe follow kind of in here pretty well. Let's just see what that looks like. We're gonna be at our start frame, the beginning, and we're gonna hit analyze forward. We can also analyze frame by frame. We can analyze backwards. We're just gonna go forward. So we hit play, it's chugging along, so it's processing one frame at a time, trying to search everything, and we're gonna see how our results go. You might see this point move around. Maybe it gets disconnected and then just loses the track altogether. This is taking quite a while because my search box is huge. So let's put a stop on that. And I'm going to Control Z to undo it. Let's try making this smaller. So maybe we make our search area way smaller so it's not working as hard. And maybe we try, this is kind of nice, contrasty. The hard thing here is he's going to be moving. The sweatshirt's actually going to be moving. So it's hard to get a perfect track in this scenario. But I think it's going to be good enough for our purposes. So let's try making everything much smaller. It really doesn't need to look outside of that. Let's try just tracking this kind of back. Great contrast. Let's hit play. Holy cow, now we're flying. Look how much quicker that is. And it's tracking really well. Like if we look at that, let's go ahead and apply this to our footage. Let's come back into, actually before we do that, make sure you're selected here. We have this, we need to edit the target, but we need a target for it to go to first. So let's right click in our gray zone here, new, let's add a null. Let's hit enter on this to rename it to motion track data. And then under edit target, we're going to select motion track data. That's our only other layer there. Hit OK, excuse me. And then we had other options here for rotation and scale, and all that would do is create another box and it would try to match the rotation and scale. Typically, a lot of instances where I'm using this, I don't necessarily need that. So we're just going to leave that off. We're just going to copy the position data, and now we'll hit, now that we've selected our target, which is this null layer, we're going to hit apply, X and Y, that's okay. Boom. Now we're back into our composition. Our layer's still here with that data, but we're in the composition, and kind of hard to see what's going on here. So I'm just going to click off of that, and not sure. Oh, there's our layer name, motion track data. And we can see here the corner of this null object is linked pretty well. We see all of our keyframes and how it moves throughout the scene, which is pretty neat. So let's apply that. Let's go ahead and create our little layer here. So we can do a layer new shape. And we've talked about shape layers and how they can be used in other episodes this month of the Creative Challenge. And we'll call this call out. So let's go ahead, it's a shape layer right now, we don't have anything on it. Let's go ahead and make a circle. And if I hold shift, it's gonna make a perfect circle. Zoom in so we can see what we're doing here. That's a little big, I'm gonna undo that and just make a new one. So maybe something like that. Hold shift to make it perfectly circular. Cool. And then we can take the pen tool, and on the same layer here, we have our circle here, we click here, we can actually just click and make a new shape within that same shape layer. So a shape layer can house many shape layers, which is great for just keeping your project clean and consistent. I'm gonna do that, hold shift, we're gonna draw a little line out, and let's get a little more creative. Draw a line down, and then maybe out here. So now we have kind of this call out, zoom out, that looks pretty good. So we have these layers here, and we can animate these. We'll save the animation for if there's more time, but let's add some text. Let's say, hey, Adobe. Isn't that a fun first name, Adobe? You see how our anchor point is here? I always like to center the anchor point, and if we get into animating some of this at the end, you'll understand why, but I'm gonna hit Control-Alt-Home, which is the same as doing right-clicking on it and going to transform and center anchor point in layer content. So I use that all the time. Control-Alt-Home. And then we can set this down here, and maybe our text we make a little bit bigger. Sure, you get the idea. And then we can come back and animate that. So the other thing I would do here is I would want to make sure that my text is linked to my call out. So wherever my call out goes, my text goes. And then now, very carefully, I'm just gonna move this forward. You're gonna see nothing's happening because we haven't actually linked it to the null motion track data that we collected. So let's go back to where it looks like it makes sense. So maybe something like that. And now at this point, we can select, let's see, our text is linked to the callout, and our callout can be linked to the motion track data. So now both the text and the callout will follow this. Look at that. And it stays with them pretty well. Drifts a little bit, but by the end here, I think we'll be moving it anyhow. And we could also just take this and slide it over a bit. I don't think anyone would notice. And remember, since it's all linked together, that should be fine. Because he kind of, his proportions move in the scene, so I think that's fine. So that's the typical motion tracker inside of After Effects. What if we wanted to have some 3D text in space? We could try to track maybe some of these branches up here and then fiddle with the footage, or I'm sorry, the text, and see how that goes, but I don't think it's gonna work very well. A better method would be to use the 3D camera tracker. So let's dive into that. So if we click on our footage here, come up to track camera. All right, we hit track camera. What's it doing? It's doing a two-step process. It's looking at the contrast between pixels, but it's looking at the entire scene and basically tracking a whole bunch of things at once and saying, here's a point, here's a point, here's a point. And then in 3D space, where do those points move? So with enough of those, you can kind of set a whole scene and have your text move in and out of your object, in and out of your scene. I don't know if that made sense. Anyways, we finished tracking here, and we can see that if we toggle down advanced, you can also do detailed analysis. Your results might vary. Sometimes it makes it better. Sometimes it tries too hard and it's picking up data that you actually don't want because it's trying harder. So you can try it if you're not getting a good track. And then you might be like, well, Alex, what's a good track? So if you look at this average error, we have 0.78 pixels. That's pretty good. You want to shoot for under 1 pixel. If it's above 1 pixel, your track might not be doing so good, and then your text might not look like it's blending into the scene very well. So this is pretty good. We're having good results. And maybe we want the text to be kind of in this zone here, like he rides underneath the text in 3D space. So where did our points go? Well, we want to make sure to click on our layer and then click on the actual effect, and now we see our points again. And if you just select one of these points, you'll see kind of the direction it is angled. So we have all this here, and we have all these ones up in the tree, but you can't see them. So let's make them bigger. And this just makes it bigger for old eyes. And now we can lasso all these, and it's gonna average all these ones I'm selecting, all these ones on the tree. I don't want the ones in the background because you gotta think of 3D space in terms of planes. So like things that are further away are gonna move slower than things up close. And we can grab these ones on this tree. And what that's gonna do is average kind of this whole little lasso area I selected and say, hey, there it is. This is kind of like the middle of all of that in the plane in 3D space where we think it would make the most sense and the angle that things would work at. So we have this, it's averaging all these. We can right click and go to create text and camera. Created a camera, so now we're in a 3D scene. You're gonna see this 3D button here next to our 3D text. So anything that is right in the middle where we saw that surface area, like the bullseye basically, that's where it's averaging the middle. So the further to the right, there's gonna be more and less parallax the further away you go from that point. So it's a good idea to take the anchor point of your text, and it's usually in this bottom left corner, but let's go ahead and move it so it's kind of a little more centered. So kind of in the middle and there, and that's kind of like the middle of the plane that our tracker was saying, hey, this is the average of all these points you selected. From here, we can toggle down the text transform properties. We can rotate it a little bit. The thing we want to be careful is we don't want to move. Position is going to do weird things because it's in 3D space now. So use these X, Y, and Z, but you don't want to move the position too terribly much because the more you move it, the more it's not going to be synced with that spot. So if you bring it forward, it's going to look bigger because you're bringing it closer in 3D space, which is fine. You just need to keep in mind where you want it to be. And then maybe we rotate it a little bit, whatever makes sense, something like that. Tilt it up, tilt it down, have some fun with it. So now we have this text that's locked on. Cool. So we have this really bright white text. What can we do with that, Alex, in 10 minutes? What we can do is we can actually add some lights and make it look a little bit better. So I want you to look at, right now, geometry options, we can do that. Most projects that you start new, this 3D renderer here, I went to composition settings, which was Control K, go to 3D renderer. It's typically under classic 3D when you make a new project. You don't have these geometry options. What does that mean? You don't have the ability to extrude the text in 3D space to make it have some depth, make it look 3D. So you have to change the render engine that After Effects uses. We can change that to Cinema 4D. Now, I won't get into the weeds on this. There's some reasons you want to do that, and there's reasons you don't want to do it, because not all effects work in those render engines. But for what we're doing today, for this, it's perfect. So, geometry options. Now we can do this. We can come over here, get a little closer. You'll see what's happening, and I'm going to extrude this text, which is going to make it stick out more. And right now, it's just like, what is happening? I can't see. It's because we don't have any lights in our scene. So we can go with like 5. That might even be too much. 4. We need some light in here. So we need to create light, because everything right now is solid white. You don't see shadows. You don't see edges. So it doesn't look right. So what we can do, you can add a layer new light. We can make it white. And that's fine. So now automatically, we just threw a light in the scene, and automatically you can tell, hey, that's what this extrusion is doing. You can see it getting longer, actually 3D effects on it, right? So we can come to our views, do a 2 view so we can see what's going on, and tell this view to be, hey, not active camera, we're gonna be the top camera. Don't see anything, zoom out. So here's our scene. So our light, this is our camera, this is the lens we're looking through, this is our text, and this is our light, which is way back here, and that's because it's by default. It just put it right at the midpoint, the beginning, starting point, whatever you call it. So we can move this light in Z-space, move it closer to our layer, and then now it's black because it's actually, the light is technically in 3D space. We're behind the layer now. So kind of some basics of positioning things in 3D space adds a whole nother element. We can move it around. You can see it reacting, the light, the effect it's having here. And you could even try to match this if you do like videography. You have a 3-point lighting system. Maybe you add multiple lights and you change the intensity of some of them. This is where you can be in the project and have some fun and really just kind of go wild. So what I mean by that, just to show you really quick, we could have this light and we can move it around wherever we want, and maybe it's a little low here, so we're going to bring it up higher. And you could have that, so this is kind of lit up. We could duplicate this light, and this one, if you double click, maybe we make this second one kind of more like a fill light on the side or behind, so we get these edges maybe be a little closer to like a blue from the sky or something from your environment. So now you're already seeing we're getting a little bit of that white. We can take this and like slide it over. So what's happening is now these shadows are filling in with those other colors. That kind of blue, we get a bit more from the sky. So you can really play around with this. I'm not going to spend too much time. I think you get the idea. We can move this light around just to get something that looks a little more like it matches your scene. It's not just a white blob. Now we're getting something we can play with. We can say lap 1. So now we have kind of this whole scene playing out. Cool, right? So 2 different methods of tracking, both serve different purposes depending on what you're doing. We're talking a little bit about 3D. We're talking about some lights, starting to get kind of a little intro into it. We got a couple minutes here. I would love for you guys to open up this project, play around with these lights and see how you can make this look. I'd be curious to see what you can do here, and maybe this text here is something else we could do. Maybe it kind of comes on from the side. So maybe it finishes here, but it starts, let's move that over. So that's our first, that's where our keyframe ends. And maybe it comes from behind this tree, right? So this could be ease this keyframe in. So now we have this kind of like it's coming from the side, but it's not from behind the tree. So what could you do really quickly? You could duplicate this dirt bike layer, and we're just going to add a quick little garbage mat to our foreground. And all you do here, so now we have our footage is on top of everything, just temporarily. We're going to draw a quick little mask on here around these trees. And so we have this, and you can see our text is showing up a bit there. That's fine. If we come into effects and presets, we're going to type in extract, apply that to our top foreground layer, and we just want to get kind of those trees keyframed out just a little bit. Get rid of that. And if you don't see the edges here, you just might need to make this window a bit wider. So now we drag this back a little bit, and you'll see, hey, it kind of looks like, you know, before and after. You get a bit going on here, and you can play with these. You're basically masking out brightness or darkness depending on which side you're affecting here. You can also do a simple choker, throw that on, turn it up just a little bit. That'll just kind of help with some of those fine branches. Whoa. So we get something that kind of starts to look, it's got a little more depth, right? And then maybe at the very beginning here, this is just 0. And it comes on to like 100. So now it's kind of like it's coming from behind the trees, and yeah, maybe here we need to edit a little bit more. So you get the idea. We can change our foreground a little bit to make it match a bit better. So something like that maybe. And you could play with this, have a lot of fun with it. So that's how you could bring in your 3D text using the motion tracker, the 3D camera tracker. You might need to adjust your mask here so we don't have our foreground with those trees. There we go. Okay, so what else can we do? We have 3 minutes. Do you think we can animate this to come on really quick? Let's try. So we start here. Let's come back to this. Let's try to animate. We have our circle, our call out, our shape layer, coming back to what we did at the beginning. And remember, we have 2 different shapes inside of our shape layer. So shape 1 is our line. Let's make sure to rename these. And shape 2 is the circle. So the line, we're gonna do what we did in, like, say the first week of this creative challenge. We can simply come in here and add a trim paths. So we click this add button, trim paths. Make sure it's inside of your shape, otherwise it'll affect both layers. So trim paths, and we can keyframe the end. We want it to start, the end of it should be at 0%. Move forward a few frames, should be at 100%. And maybe before that happens, we have our, we can scoot this over just a little bit. So maybe before that happens, we have our little circle animate on. So we have our trim paths on there, then our circle. We could do trim paths, but we can also do all kinds of other things, like click this little add button. We got pucker and bloat. We could come in here, and this just kind of like morphs it. So we have our circle, and where's our circle? Got to turn it on, it got turned off. So we have our circle here. If we change pucker and bloat, you see it's kind of making it more of a square now. So you play with this, so you could morph in all these shapes. So maybe you start with like a crosshair, something like that. And then it goes into, and we'll put this right at the beginning, moving things over. And by the time it's here, maybe it's, you know, something more like this. Like instead of it being a circle, you can make it have a little more dynamic shape to it. So ease in, and then at this point, your line starts to animate on. So let's see what that looks like. Yeah, it's looking great. Computer's working a little harder because we have 3D cameras going now. But what else could we do here? Maybe this call out. Maybe the transform on here is the scale is at 0. So basically rises up and then morphs into that shape. We can come forward just a couple frames to set it 100. So that's what off screen. And then Adobe, what we can do here. Cool, so we have our line. Where's our line? Comes right here. What we could do with Adobe, I've done this on other streams. We could right click here, mask, new mask, and then we're gonna do this really quick. Come into animate. We're gonna animate the position. And since we have this mask on here, we can just hit boom. This is where we want it to finish. But start point, we just lower it down below. And because we have the mask on there now, you won't see it. So it's gonna look like it's coming from underneath. So there you go. So you put that all together really quick. My computer starts playing it back. And we have all sorts of things happening here. So it's about all we have time for. We really kind of got through quite a bit here. Lots of things to play around with. I hope you had a great time hanging out for this half an hour, and thank you so much for just being a part of the community and asking questions and everything. This is my final stream for this month, but I will be back, I'm sure, and there is more happening right now after this. So stick around. Thank you so much, and have fun with the project. Thank you.